When the ground beneath a small village starts to wither, a blind child and their loyal dog are the last hope to save an ancient secret. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when John Smith was already on his feet, observing the vastness of his small farm in the heart of rural Virginia. At 53, the wrinkles on his face told stories of decades of hard work on the land of Pine Creek, a village almost forgotten by time. His calloused hands caressed the soil with the tenderness of someone touching the face of a loved one. The world around him was silent, not by choice, but due to the condition that had accompanied him since his youth. John couldn't hear the birds announcing the morning, nor the sound of the wind rustling the leaves of the oak trees. His world was made of vibrations felt on his skin, colors seen with attentive eyes, and an almost supernatural connection with the land he cultivated. It was as if the absence of sound had sharpened his other senses, allowing him to perceive subtle changes in the soil, predict rain before clouds formed, and understand the cycles of nature in a way few could. "Dad, breakfast is ready," signaled Emily, his 6-year-old daughter, using the sign language they had developed together. The girl, with opaque eyes and a shy smile, moved through the house with surprising confidence. Emily had never seen the colors of the sunrise or the contours of the mountains surrounding their home, but she saw the world through other senses. Her small fingers could read the vibrations of the earth, feel the approach of storms, and hear whispers from the forest that even the most attentive ears couldn't capture. John smiled at his daughter, nodding affectionately. Despite the limitations they both carried, they had found a unique way to communicate, not just with each other, but also with the natural world around them. Together, they formed a duo that complemented each other. John, with his ancestral knowledge of the land, Emily with her heightened perception of the invisible. After breakfast, John took Emily by the hand to the orchard. It was their daily ritual, checking each tree, feeling the soil, talking to the plants. To any outside observer, it would be a strange scene, a deaf man and a blind girl walking among the trees, touching trunks and leaves, as if they were listening to secrets no one else could hear. "The blueberry bushes are restless today, Dad," Emily signaled, furrowing her brow. "They say something is going to change." John observed his daughter with curiosity. Since she was little, Emily had demonstrated this special sensitivity, this ability to perceive what he called the breathing of the earth. At first, he thought it was just childish imagination, but over time he learned to trust the girl's perceptions. As they returned home, Rusty, the wolf dog hybrid that John had rescued years ago, approached them with unusual behavior. The animal, normally calm and protective, was agitated, ears perked up, snout pointed toward the road leading to the village. John followed the dog's gaze and spotted a dust cloud approaching. It was a car, something rare in those parts. Vehicles that reached Pine Creek usually brought changes, and rarely for the better. In the small village square, residents were already gathering, curious about the stranger's arrival. The black, luxurious car, completely out of place in that rural setting, parked in front of the only establishment that served as a bar, grocery store, and meeting point. From the vehicle stepped a tall man in an impeccable suit and dark glasses. Richard. Barnes had the bearing of someone used to opening doors with just a look. He smiled with the confidence of someone who always gets what they want. John observed from a distance, feeling an inexplicable tightness in his chest. Emily squeezed his hand firmly. "He's come for the land, Dad," she signaled, with a certainty that made John shudder. "The land is afraid of him." Mrs. Anderson, the village elder, approached John with slow steps, supported by her carved wooden cane. At almost 90, she was the guardian of local stories and traditions. When she spoke, everyone listened, including John, who had learned to read lips over the years. "That man didn't come here for nothing, John," said the elder, her wrinkled eyes fixed on the stranger. "He has the smell of those who see gold where we see life." Richard had already initiated an animated conversation with some villagers. His broad smile and promises of prosperity seemed to captivate everyone. John noticed how he gesticulated enthusiastically, pointing to the mountains, to the river, to the lands. His lands. Rusty growled softly beside John. Emily, still holding her father's hand, whispered something that only he could understand. The Guardians are restless, Dad. They feel that something is buried where it shouldn't be. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The news of Richard Barnes's arrival spread through the village of Pine Creek like wildfire. In less than a day, there wasn't a single resident who didn't know about the ambitious project the businessman planned for the region, a luxury eco-resort that promised jobs, tourism, and development. In the small parish hall, Richard presented colourful slides on his laptop, showing images of sophisticated cabins integrated with nature, natural pools, and smiling tourists enjoying rural authenticity with five-star comfort, as he himself described. Just imagine. Friends, Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, Pine Creek on the international tourism map. Your children won't need to leave for big cities anymore. Progress will come to you. Most residents applauded enthusiastically. For people who had always struggled against scarcity and isolation, Richard's promises sounded like answers to their prayers. Only a few, like Mrs. Anderson, remained skeptical, observing with narrowed eyes the beautiful images projected on the peeling wall. John remained at the back of the hall, reading Richard's lips and interpreting the animated gestures of his neighbors. Beside him, Emily held Rusty by the leash, the animal more restless than ever. Dad, the roots beneath the ground are trembling, the girl signaled discreetly. Richard, noticing John's silent presence, approached with his rehearsed smile. Someone had already informed him about the farmer's condition, and he spoke slowly, articulating his words clearly to facilitate lip reading. Mr. Smith, it's a pleasure to meet you. I heard your farm is the oldest in the region. John nodded, suspicious. Richard's handshake was too firm, as if trying to demonstrate authority. I've been here for 40 years, responded John, his voice slightly modulated by the lack of auditory reference. My father before me, and my grandfather before him. Richard smiled, but his eyes analyzed John as if assessing an obstacle to be removed. Tradition is something admirable, he said, but progress is inevitable. I would very much like to visit your property tomorrow. They say it's the heart of this entire region. Before John could respond, Emily tugged at his shirt. The girl had an expression of alarm he rarely saw. Even without being able to hear, John perceived that Rusty was growling, the fur on his neck bristling. That won't be possible, John replied firmly. We're in the middle of harvest. Richard's smile wavered for a moment before recomposing itself. I understand. Perhaps another time. That night on the way back home, John felt the weight of his neighbors' gazes. Some greeted him with respect. As always, others averted their eyes as if his refusal to receive Richard was a betrayal to the community. Ernest Lewis, owner of the small store and John's childhood friend, caught up with them on the dirt road. John, you need to reconsider, Ernest said, gesturing so his friend would understand. Barnes's project could save Pine Creek. My children are thinking about moving to Richmond. There's no future here without something like this. John sighed. How could he explain to Ernest that what Richard called progress could mean the destruction of something much more valuable? The land isn't just a place to build, Ernest, John replied. It's alive, it has memory. Ernest shook his head, frustrated by the response he considered superstitious. It's exactly because you say things like that people in the village are starting to call you crazy, John. When they arrived home, John noticed that Emily was unusually quiet. After a simple dinner, the girl sat on the porch, her fingers playing with a necklace she rarely took off, a small crystal wrapped in silver wires, a gift from her mother before she left. What did you hear today, daughter? John signaled, sitting beside her. Emily hesitated, her sightless eyes turned toward the darkness of the nearby forest. The Guardians are agitated, Dad. They said the man from the city has been here before, a long time ago. He's looking for something that shouldn't be found. John frowned, confused. Richard Barnes seemed too young to have any previous connection to Pine Creek. The next morning, John found unknown footprints at the edge of his property. Someone had been there during the night, observing his house. The tracks led to the sacred, a spring, a small crystal-clear lake hidden among rocks, which the village elders considered a place of power. John followed the footprints with Rusty by his side. The dog was nervous, sniffing the air intensely. When they reached the spring, John noticed that the water, normally clear as crystal, was cloudy, with a strange greenish hue. As he approached to examine it better, he noticed something shiny at the bottom of the lake. It looked like a metallic object partially buried in the sand. When he leaned down to try to reach it, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned quickly, startled, and found Richard Barnes smiling at him perfectly, dressed even in that rural environment. "Beautiful property, Mr. Smith," said Richard, articulating clearly. "Sorry to appear without warning, but the fence was open, and I decided to take a look. This place is even more special than I imagined." Anar stood up, positioning himself between Richard and the spring, an instinctive feeling of protection taking over him. "You're on private property," he responded, his voice carrying an unusual firmness, "and the fence is never left open." Richard's smile didn't diminish, but his eyes darkened. "I have a very generous offer for you, Mr. Smith. 10 times the market value of your land. Think about your daughter's future." John remained impassive, although inside his heart was racing. It wasn't just about money. It was about something much older, deeper. "My answer is no." Richard adjusted his tie, a gesture that seemed out of place in that rural environment. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Smith. It's just a matter of discovering what yours is." When Richard finally left, John turned his attention back to the spring. The shiny object had disappeared, but the water remained cloudy. Somewhere in the forest, Rusty began to howl, a sound John couldn't hear, but that made the birds take flight in alarm. Back at the house, he found Emily on the porch, her face pale with concern. "The Guardians are calling, Dad," she signaled, urgently. "They say it's time for you to learn the truth about our land." Emily's uneasiness increased with each passing hour. Sitting at the kitchen table, the girl traced invisible patterns on the worn wood, her fingers moving as if following a map only she could perceive. John observed his daughter with growing concern as he prepared a lemon balm tea, a remedy his late wife, Claire, always used to calm nerves. "What exactly do the Guardians want to show?" John signaled, placing the steaming cup in front of his daughter. Emily raised her face, her opaque eyes seeming to see beyond the walls of the house. "They say there's a secret buried in the heart of the forest, something that belongs to the earth and must remain protected." John sighed, sitting next to his daughter. Stories about the forest guardians had always been part of Pine Creek's folklore. Mrs. Anderson told that they were ancestral spirits who had protected the natural balance since immemorial times. John had always considered them just legends, stories to entertain children on winter nights around the fire. But Emily's conviction and recent events were beginning to shake his certainties. "Let's visit Mrs. Anderson," he decided, helping Emily put on her boots. Mrs. Anderson's house was at the edge of the village, almost at the border with the forest. It was an old building, with adobe walls and a thatched roof, surrounded by a lush garden where medicinal herbs and vibrantly colored flowers grew. The elder was sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, as if she had been expecting them. "Finally, you've come," she said, her wrinkled face opening into a toothless smile. "The birds told me you would be on your way." John helped Emily climb the worn porch steps. The girl immediately went to the elder, taking her wrinkled hands in hers. "You know the Guardians, don't you?" asked Emily, her soft voice carrying an unusual urgency. Mrs. Anderson exchanged a meaningful look with John before answering. "Yes, little one. They spoke to me when I was your age, but afterwards they went silent. It's rare they choose someone to hear their voices." John observed the interaction, reading the elder's lips attentively. "Anderson, what's happening to our land?" he asked, sitting on a wooden bench nearby. "First, this businessman appears out of nowhere, specifically interested in my property. Then the sacred spring turns cloudy. And now Emily talks about these guardians as if she's conversing with them daily." The elder sighed deeply, her eyes losing themselves in the distant mountains. "Many years ago, John, your family was chosen to protect something very special. Your grandfather, Anthony Smith, was a man who, like you, had a deep connection with the land. The Guardians entrusted him with the protection of the heart of the mountain." "What's that?" questioned John, confused. It's an ancient crystal older than these mountains, explained Mrs. Anderson, lowering her voice as if fearing to be heard by unwanted ears. They say it contains the vital essence of the entire region. It controls the waters, the fertility of the land, even the climate. Emily nodded vigorously, as if finally hearing confirmation of something she already knew. They showed me in dreams, Dad. It's like a stone that shines with its own light, a light that seems to come from within the earth. John frowned, increasingly. Worried. Never had his father or grandfather mentioned such an artifact. How could they have kept such an important secret? Mrs. Anderson, perceiving his doubt, stood up with difficulty and went into her house, returning minutes later with a carved wooden box, darkened by time. Your grandfather gave this to me to keep, John. He said the time would come when it would be necessary. I think that time is now. Inside the box was a yellowed map, carefully hand-drawn, showing the Pine Creek region. In the center, where John's farm was located, there was a symbol he didn't recognize, a circle with spirals that intertwined, forming a hypnotic pattern. Richard Barnes. John began, a sudden understanding taking shape in his mind. It's no coincidence he's here, confirmed Mrs. Anderson, her eyes gaining an unusual hardness. The Barnes family has been searching for the heart of the mountain for generations. His grandfather, Augustus Barnes, almost found it 60 years ago, but the Guardians interfered. Emily, who had been silent, touching the map with her fingertips, suddenly gasped. Dad, he's already started digging. I can feel the earth being wounded. Alarmed, John took the map and stood up. I need to get back to the farm now, Mrs. Anderson held his arm with surprising strength for someone so elderly. Take this too, she said, handing him a small leather pouch. They're seeds of the guardian tree. If the worst happens, they will be the last protection. On the way back, John and Emily met Ernest coming from the opposite direction with an excited expression. John, Barnes is offering jobs to everyone, he exclaimed, gesticulating frantically. He's hiring men for a preliminary geological investigation, paying double what you earn from the coffee harvest. He's digging on land that doesn't belong to him, Ernest, replied John, his voice laden with urgency. This isn't investigation, it's invasion. Ernest seemed uncomfortable. Look, John, he has permission from the town hall for soil analysis in community areas. Nobody is invading your land. Not yet, completed John, resuming his path with hurried steps. When they reached the farm, John immediately sensed something was wrong. Rusty, normally present to greet them, didn't come to meet them. The house door was ajar, swinging slightly with the afternoon breeze. Inside, the house seemed to have been ransacked, drawers open, furniture out of place. It wasn't a common break-in. Whoever had been there was looking for something specific. Emily, stay here, John signaled, but the girl was already advancing down the hallway, guided by a certainty he didn't understand. She went straight to John's room, where an old wooden trunk, an inheritance from his grandfather, was open. The false bottom of the trunk, which John didn't even know existed, had been removed, revealing an empty space. The real map was here, Dad, Emily signaled, her fingers tracing the outline of the empty hiding place. The map to the heart of the mountain. They took it. John felt his blood freeze. If the map Mrs. Anderson had given him wasn't the real one, and the original had been stolen. A distant howl reached them. Even unable to hear, John felt the vibration of the sound reverberating through the earth beneath his feet. Emily raised her head, alert. It's Rusty. He found something in the forest, exclaimed the girl, already heading for the door. The Guardians say we need to run, Dad. The heart is in danger. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the treetops as John and Emily entered the forest. Guided by Rusty's distant howls, they advanced along almost invisible trails, known only to those who, like John, had grown up on that land. Emily moved with surprising grace, as if she could see the path ahead, her small feet avoiding roots and stones with almost supernatural precision. They're moving east, Dad, Emily signaled, stopping suddenly, toward Bell Rock. John frowned. Bell Rock was a peculiar rock formation in the heart of the forest, a monolithic structure that, according to local legends, emitted melodious sounds during full moons. It was also one of the few places marked on the map Mrs. Anderson had given him. How do you know that? asked John, observing his daughter with a mixture of amazement and apprehension. "The guardians are showing me the way," she replied, her blind eyes turned toward the darkening sky. "They say the man from the city has 3 helpers with him. They're using machines to dig." A pang of urgency pierced John's chest. If Richard was already digging, it meant the stolen map had revealed the exact location of the artifact. There was no time to lose. "We'll take a shortcut," decided John, taking his daughter's hand and veering onto an almost imperceptible trail to the right. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, Richard Barnes supervised the operation with impatience. 3 men worked under the light of powerful lanterns, using metal detectors and small portable excavators. The businessman repeatedly consulted an ancient map, now protected by a plastic cover. "It must be exactly here," he said, pointing to a specific spot near the base of Bell Rock. "The map is clear. The crystal was buried 3 meters deep, under the half-moon mark." Samuel, the oldest of the hired workers, wiped the sweat from his forehead with his shirt sleeve. "Mr. Barnes, we've dug almost 2 meters and found nothing but stones. It's getting dark quickly, and the forest becomes dangerous at night." Richard gave him an icy look. "Keep digging. I'll pay triple for night hours." The man hesitated, exchanging nervous glances with the other workers. "It's not just a matter of money, sir. They say this part of the forest is protected." Richard laughed with disdain. "Protected? By whom? By imaginary spirits? Or by the deaf old man and his blind daughter?" The men lowered their eyes, uncomfortable. Stories about the forest guardians were part of their culture, passed down from generation to generation. Even skeptics, none of them liked to so openly challenge local traditions. 3 hours, compromised Richard, consulting his expensive wristwatch. "If we don't find anything in 3 hours, we'll end for today and start again at dawn." Reluctantly, the men resumed work. The sound of shovels and pickaxes echoed through the silent forest like a profanation. About half a kilometer away, John and Emily continued their hurried journey. The darkness was now almost complete, but John knew the path by instinct, and Emily seemed guided by an invisible force. Suddenly, an orange figure appeared among the trees. Rusty, panting and agitated, ran to them. The dog circled around Emily, rubbing his body against the girl's legs, as if trying to communicate something urgent. She bent down, touching the animal's damp fur. "He found something, Dad," she signaled, her childish face contorted in concern. "Something that shouldn't be here." Following Rusty, they deviated from the trail, entering a denser part of the forest. After a few minutes, the dog stopped, pointing with his snout to a small clearing where the vegetation had been recently disturbed. John approached cautiously, noticing tire marks in the soft earth and remains of food packaging. But what really caught his attention was a small metallic object half buried, a triangular stake with inscriptions he didn't recognize. "Topographic markers," concluded John, examining the object. "They're mapping the area." Emily crouched next to her father, her sensitive fingers touching the soil around the stake. "The earth is contaminated here," she whispered with repulsion. "Something was spilled, something that hurts the roots." John collected some of the soil in a plastic bag he carried in his pocket. The analysis would have to wait, but his experience as a farmer already told him it could be some kind of herbicide or industrial chemical. They continued advancing, now guided by both Rusty and Emily's extraordinary perception. As they approached Bell Rock, John began to notice more evident signs of disturbance: broken branches, trampled undergrowth, more topographic markers. Suddenly, the glow of lanterns filtered through the trees ahead. Instinctively, John pulled Emily behind a fallen trunk, signaling for her to remain silent. Rusty crouched beside them, his amber eyes fixed in the direction of the lights. Peering over the trunk, John saw Richard and his men. The excavation had already created a considerable hole, and one of the workers was operating what appeared to be a sophisticated metal detector. "We're close," Richard's voice reached them, laden with excitement. "The detector is registering something big less than a meter away." John felt a strange vibration under his feet. At first, he thought it was just the impact of the excavation tools, but soon realized it was something different, a rhythmic tremor, like the beats of a giant heart. Beside him, Emily grabbed his arm tightly, her blind eyes wide in alarm. "The Guardians are awakening, Dad," she signaled, her fingers trembling against John's arm. "They're angry." As if in response to the girl's words, a sudden gust of wind swept the clearing, extinguishing 2 of the lanterns. The workers looked around, frightened. The sky, previously starry, began to rapidly cover with dark clouds. "Keep digging," ordered Richard, his voice betraying a note of desperation. "We're almost there." But the men hesitated, looking nervously at the sky and at the forest that seemed to close around them. One of them abruptly dropped his shovel. "This isn't right, Mr. Barnes. The forest doesn't want us to continue." "Stupid superstitions," roared Richard, taking the shovel himself and starting to dig frantically. "I'll do this alone if necessary." It was at that moment that John made his decision. Signaling for Emily to stay hidden with Rusty, he emerged from the vegetation, approaching the excavation with firm steps. "This is private property, Barnes," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knows every inch of that land. "You and your men need to leave now." Richard looked up, surprised by John's sudden appearance. His surprise quickly turned to fury. "Don't be foolish, Smith. What's buried here is worth more than you could imagine. With the heart of the mountain, I can transform this entire region and destroy the balance that took millennia to form," retorted John. "The crystal belongs to the earth. It's what keeps the forest alive, the waters clean." Richard laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You really believe these legends?" "The crystal is just a rare stone, probably some kind of radioactive mineral or natural superconductor. Its chemical composition could revolutionize the clean energy industry." John took another step forward, determined. "I don't care what you think it is. It's on my land, and you're trespassing." The businessman narrowed his eyes, dropping the shovel and reaching for something in his coat. "I'm afraid you're mistaken about the ownership, Smith," he said, pulling out a folded document. "This specific area has officially belonged to the town hall for 2 generations. I have an authorization signed by the mayor to conduct geological research here." John felt his blood freeze. How was this possible? His family had always considered the entire extent of the forest as part of their property. As the men confronted each other, the wind increased in intensity. The clouds now completely covered the sky, and lightning began to streak the darkness. In the distance, the tremor beneath the soil grew, causing small stones to jump around the excavation. Suddenly, Emily emerged from the vegetation, Rusty at her side, advancing with sure steps despite the darkness. "You need to stop now," she announced, her childish voice carrying a surprising authority. "The Guardians are warning. The last chance is being given." A heavy silence fell over the clearing when Emily finished speaking. Even Richard, with all his city arrogance, seemed momentarily disconcerted by the presence of the blind girl who moved through the dark forest with the confidence of someone who sees far beyond eyes. "What kind of theater is this, Smith?" Richard recovered, casting a look of disdain at John. "Using your own daughter in this charade is a new level of lowness." Before John could respond, one of the workers let out an exclamation of surprise. The metal detector he was holding began to emit a sharp, constant sound, its lights flashing frantically. "Mr. Barnes, we found something." Richard's attention immediately turned to the excavation, his eyes gleaming with barely disguised greed. John took the moment to approach Emily, quickly signaling for her to retreat. But the girl remained firm, her face turned toward the stormy sky. "It's too late to retreat, Dad," she signaled, her quick fingers showing an urgency John rarely saw. "The Guardians have already begun to awaken." As if responding to Emily's words, the tremor beneath their feet intensified. It was no longer just a subtle vibration, but a true shaking that made the earth undulate like water. Small cracks began to form around the excavation, and one of the lanterns fell into the hole, illuminating something that gleamed under the removed earth. "There it is!" exclaimed Richard, practically jumping into the excavation. "The heart of the mountain!" His hands frantically pushed away the earth that still partially covered the object. When he finally raised it, all present gasped in astonishment. It was a crystal the size of a closed fist, of such a deep blue that it seemed to contain the night sky itself. More impressive still, It emitted its own light, pulsating, which illuminated Richard's face with an ethereal glow. "It's even more extraordinary than I imagined," murmured the businessman, hypnotized by the play of lights within the crystal. "It must be worth millions, no, billions." John moved to intercept him, but two of the workers blocked his path. A lightning bolt cut across the sky, momentarily illuminating the scene as if it were day. In the brief flash, John saw something that made his blood freeze. As Richard raised the crystal, the plants around the excavation began to visibly wither, as if aging years in seconds. "Put it back, Barnes, put it back," shouted John, his voice carrying the desperation of someone beginning to understand the true magnitude of what was at stake. "Look what's happening to the forest." Richard, as if coming out of a trance, looked around. The devastation was undeniable. In a perfect circle expanding from the crystal, vegetation was withering. Leaves were yellowing and falling, flowers were wilting. But instead of alarming him, the sight seemed only to increase his fascination. Extraordinary. The crystal must emit some kind of radiation or electromagnetic field that affects plant growth. Imagine the applications. At that moment, Rusty began to howl, a long, mournful sound that seemed to echo throughout the forest. Emily crouched down, placing her hands on the ground, her face contorted in an expression of pain. "They're coming, Dad," she signaled when John approached, concerned. "The Guardians are furious." As if in response to the girl's words, a supernatural wind swept the clearing, so strong it almost knocked the men over. The clouds above them began to spin in a circular pattern, and the air became charged with an intense smell of ozone and wet earth. Suddenly, the roots of the trees surrounding the clearing began to move, rising from the soil like serpents awakening. The workers backed away in panic, abandoning their tools. "What the hell is happening?" shouted one of them as a thick root serpentined around his leg. "The forest is alive," responded another, already running toward the trail. Richard, still holding the crystal, observed the scene with a mixture of incredulity and scientific fascination. Some kind of seismic phenomenon causing the displacement of roots. Or perhaps the crystal is altering the local magnetic field. His attempt at rationalization was interrupted when a particularly robust root abruptly emerged beneath his feet, causing him to stagger. The crystal escaped from his hands, rolling across the ground until stopping near Emily. The girl, as if sensing its presence, bent down and delicately touched the artifact. The instant her fingers made contact with the crystalline surface, a flash of bluish light illuminated the entire clearing. John, momentarily blinded by the flash, blinked several times before being able to focus again. When he did, the sight before him left him paralyzed with astonishment. Emily was in the center of the clearing, the crystal floating a few centimeters above her extended palms. Around her, translucent forms began to materialize, silhouettes resembling trees and animals, but with an ethereal quality, as if made of light and shadow in constant movement. "The Guardians," murmured John, recognizing the figures from legends he had heard throughout his life. Richard, regaining his balance, advanced determinedly toward Emily. "Give that back, girl. That piece is property of the scientific expedition." Before he could take more than a few steps, one of the translucent figures moved to intercept him. It was the form of an immense wolf, similar to Rusty, but several times larger. The creature didn't physically touch Richard, but when it passed through him, the businessman fell to his knees, violently trembling. "Cold, so cold," he murmured, his teeth chattering as he hugged his own body. John ran to Emily, concerned about what contact with the crystal might be doing to his daughter, but when he got close enough, he realized that she showed no sign of discomfort or fear. On the contrary, a small smile played on her lips and her blind eyes seemed to finally see. "Dad," she called, her voice sounding strangely adult and serene. "The Guardians want to speak with you." One of the translucent figures in the form of an ancient tree, whose branches formed patterns resembling a face, approached John. He felt a strange tingling on his skin, as if small electric currents were traveling through his body. And then, for the first time in decades, John heard, not with his ears, which remained deaf, but directly in his mind. An ancient voice, deep like roots that reach the center of the earth, spoke directly in his thoughts. "John Smith, son of the earth, grandson of the Protector, For generations, your family has guarded our secret, even without fully understanding it. The heart of the mountain is not just a crystal, it is the anchor that maintains the balance of these lands. If it is removed, devastation will spread beyond this forest, beyond this village. Rivers will dry up, harvests will fail, the very air will become poisonous. John felt tears streaming down his face. The voice in his mind carried not just words, but emotions and images. He could see the desolate future that awaited Pine Creek if the crystal were taken away. The man from the city does not understand what he seeks. He sees only material value where there exists sacred purpose. The heart must return to its resting place, but not where it was. The ancient protection has been violated. A new sanctuary must be consecrated. "How?" asked John, his voice a broken whisper. "How can I protect it?" The answer came not in words, but in a clear vision. John saw himself and Emily planting the seeds Mrs. Anderson had given them, forming a perfect circle. In the center of the circle, the heart of the mountain rested beneath the earth, and from the seeds sprouted trees that grew with supernatural speed, their roots intertwining around the crystal, forming a living protection. "Your daughter, John Smith," continued the voice, "has been chosen as the new human guardian. Her eyes do not see the world of men, but they see ours. She will be our voice, and you will be her hands. Together, you will restore the balance." The arboreal figure retreated, and the voice in his mind silenced. John blinked, returning to the reality of the clearing, where the workers observed the scene with eyes wide with terror and fascination. Richard was still, on his knees, his body trembling, his face a mask of incomprehension. Emily lowered her arms, and the crystal descended gently until landing in her small hands. The translucent figures began to disappear, dissolving like mist in the sun. The supernatural wind abated, and the roots slowly returned to the soil. The girl turned to John, her blind eyes shining with an inner light he had never seen before. "The fee. Guardians showed me the way, Dad," she said, her voice returning to its normal childish tone. "We need to plant the seeds of the sacred tree tonight, under the full moon. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue." The full moon hung over Pine Creek like a watchful eye, pouring its silver light over the forest that seemed to breathe in unison. John and Emily had returned to the farm to fetch the necessary tools and the precious seeds given by Mrs. Anderson. Rusty accompanied them, more alert than ever, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight like small beacons. Richard Barnes and his men had retreated, shaken by the inexplicable events in the clearing. The businessman, still trembling and pale after his encounter with the wolf guardian, insisted that everything was just some kind of collective hallucination, possibly caused by forest mushroom spores. But the fear in his eyes betrayed his words of denial. "This isn't over, Smith," he threatened, as he was practically dragged back to the trail by his workers. "Shall bring specialists, equipment. I'll scientifically prove what's happening here." John wasn't shaken by the threat. Something had changed within him after the communication with the Guardians. A certainty, a deeper connection with the land he had cultivated for decades. Now, as he walked with Emily back to the forest, each step seemed lighter, more determined. The girl carried the heart of the mountain wrapped in a piece of raw cotton cloth, embroidered with ancient symbols, another gift from Mrs. Anderson. Her small fingers caressed the crystal through the fabric, as if consoling it. "It's singing, Dad," she signaled with one hand, while the other held the precious package. A very ancient song, older than the mountains. John observed his daughter, with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The role the Guardians had entrusted to her was a heavy burden for someone so young. But there was a strength in Emily that went far beyond her age, a wisdom that didn't come from years lived, but from a deep connection with something much older and wiser. When they reached the forest again, they didn't head to Bell Rock where the excavation had taken place. Following the guidance John had received from the Guardians, they walked to a denser part of the woods, where the trees were older and the air seemed charged with a different energy. Emily stopped abruptly in a small circular clearing, perfectly formed, as if nature had created a natural sanctuary. "It's here," she declared, her voice carrying an unshakable certainty. "The Guardians say this place was prepared centuries ago, waiting for the moment when it would be necessary." John looked around, noticing how the trees that surrounded the clearing seemed to lean slightly inward, like attentive sentinels. The soil was rich and soft, covered by a layer of moss that glowed softly under the moonlight. In the exact center, a small natural depression seemed to be waiting to receive the crystal. Following the instructions he had received in the vision, John began to work. With a small gardening spade, he dug 8 equidistant holes, forming a perfect circle around the central depression. In each hole he deposited one of Mrs. Anderson's mysterious seeds, small golden spheres that seemed to pulse with their own life. As he worked, he felt a presence beside him. Turning, he saw Ernest Lewis emerging from the shadows of the forest, accompanied by 3 other village residents. "We came to help, John," said Ernest, his face contrite. "Mrs. Anderson told us about the Guardians, about the crystal. We believe you." John nodded, grateful for the presence of his friends. If Richard returned with more men, they would need all the help they could get. Meanwhile, in the village, Richard Barnes hadn't given up. In his rented room at the small local hotel, he spoke energetically on his satellite phone. "I need a complete team here by tomorrow," he ordered, pacing back and forth. "Geologists, chemists, private security, and bring Dr. Mitchell. Yes, him. I want a complete analysis of this crystal. I don't care how much it costs." On the other end of the line, his assistant tried to calm him down. "Mr. Barnes, it's almost 9 o'clock at night. Even if we mobilize everyone now, the team would only arrive there by morning." "Then do that," exploded Richard. "There's something in this damn forest that's worth billions, maybe more, and I won't let a deaf farmer and a blind child stop me from obtaining it." As he hung up the phone, Richard walked to the window, looking at the forest stretching in the distance, bathed in moonlight. His determination was fueled not just by greed, but by something more personal, deeper. On his bedside table rested an old photograph yellowed by time. An older man with facial features similar to his, standing in front of the same forest, almost 60 years ago. Augustus Barnes, his grandfather, had dedicated his life to the search for the legendary heart of the mountain, dying without ever finding it. "I'll finish what you started, Grandpa," murmured Richard, caressing the photograph with uncommon reverence for someone usually so cold. "I'll prove you were right all along." Back in the clearing, the planting ritual was almost complete. The 8 seeds had been deposited in the carefully dug holes, and Emily now positioned herself in the center, holding the unwrapped crystal. The moonlight seemed to concentrate on the heart of the mountain, which shone with increasing intensity, pulsing as if it were alive. John and the other residents formed a circle around the girl, silent witnesses to a rite that none of them fully understood. Following the Guardian's instructions, Emily began to sing. It wasn't a song John recognized, nor did it seem to be in any known language. The notes flowed like water, rose like wind, resonated like thunder. It was the voice of the earth itself, channeled through the child. As she sang, Emily bent down and gently deposited the crystal in the natural depression at the center of the clearing. The moment the heart of the mountain touched the soil, a wave of bluish energy expanded like ripples in a lake, touching each of the 8 planted seeds. What happened next left everyone open-mouthed. The seeds began to sprout instantly, small, green stems emerging from the soil with supernatural speed. In a matter of minutes, they were already saplings. In an hour, young trees. John observed, amazed, as the trees grew before his eyes, their trunks twisting in complex patterns, their roots intertwining over the buried crystal, forming a natural protection. The leaves that sprouted had an unusual blue-green tone and seemed to emit a soft luminescence under the moonlight. "The guardian tree," whispered Ernest, recognizing the species from legends told by Mrs. Anderson. "They say it only blooms once, every 100 years." As the trees grew, the air around the clearing seemed to vibrate with renewed energy. John could feel life pulsing beneath his feet, as if the heart of the forest beat stronger. The colors seemed more vivid, the odors more intense, and for the first time in decades he had the sensation of hearing, not with his ears but with his whole body, the whisper of leaves, the night song of crickets, Emily's soft breathing. The Sani, girl still in the center of the circle of trees, extended her arms as if embracing the air around her. Her face shone with transcendental joy. "The Guardians are happy, Dad," she signaled when John approached. "The balance is being restored." The trees continued to grow until reaching almost 30 feet in height, their canopies forming a perfect dome that filtered the moonlight in hypnotic patterns onto the clearing's floor. The roots had formed such a dense mesh over the spot where the crystal had been buried that it would be impossible to excavate there without completely destroying the trees. Suddenly, Rusty, who had maintained vigil at the edge of the clearing, raised his head and emitted a low growl. His eyes fixed on a specific direction, ears attentive. John followed the dog's gaze and glimpsed for a brief moment a figure among the trees, Richard Barnes, observing from a distance, his face a mask of anger and determination. When he realized he had been noticed, the businessman retreated into the shadows and disappeared. "He hasn't given up," said Ernest, who had also spotted the intruder. "He'll come back with more resources, more men." John nodded gravely. The Aihihoisa battle for the heart of the mountain was just beginning, but now with the guardian trees grown, with the support of the villagers, and with the newly discovered connection to the forest guardians, he felt more prepared for what was to come. "Let's set up a guard," he decided. "Shifts of 2 people all night. We can't let them approach the sanctuary until the roots have completely secured the crystal." The men nodded, quickly organizing a schedule. Emily, exhausted by the effort of the ritual, had fallen asleep leaning against one of the new trees, her face more serene than John had seen in a long time. Rusty lay down beside her, protective as always. Looking at his sleeping daughter, John felt a mixture of pride and concern. The path that opened before them would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, there was real hope in his heart. The night wind whispered among the leaves of the guardian trees, an ancient song that somehow John could now understand. The first rays of sun had barely begun to filter through the treetops when John was awakened by Ernest. He had fallen asleep leaning against one of the guardian trees, with Emily nestled in his lap. "They're coming," whispered Ernest, his face tense in the diffuse dawn light. "Many of them." John carefully stood up, laying Emily on a bed of soft moss. The girl continued sleeping, the deep sleep of someone who had spent more energy than the body was accustomed to supporting. Rusty remained by her side, vigilant. Heading to the edge of the clearing, John could hear what his friend had already perceived: the sound of vehicles approaching along the dirt road, the noise of metallic equipment, male voices exchanging technical instructions. Richard Barnes had kept his promise. He had returned with reinforcements. "How many do you think?" John signaled to Ernest, who had better hearing. "At least 3 large pickup trucks," his friend answered, "and I heard mention of excavation equipment, geological sensors, even drones." John nodded gravely. The night had given them some time, but not enough. The guardian trees, although grown in a supernatural way, were still young. Their roots, though already intertwined over the heart of the mountain, had not yet penetrated deeply into the soil to completely anchor themselves. "We need to buy more time," John decided. "Go to the village, gather more people, not for confrontation but to witness. The more eyes watching, the less likely Barnes will try something drastic." While Ernest hurriedly departed, John returned to the center of the clearing, where the 8 trees formed a perfect circle. Touching the trunk of the nearest one, he closed his eyes and tried to connect again with the presence he had felt the night before. "Guardians of the forest," he called in his mind, "we need your help again." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly John began to feel that same vibration under his feet, that current of energy that seemed to flow from the earth to his body. The trees around trembled slightly, their bluish leaves shining with some more intensity. Emily awoke at that moment, sitting up abruptly, her blind eyes wide and alert. "Dad, they're here," she signaled, rising with urgency. "Not just the men, the guardians too." John looked around but couldn't see the translucent forms from the previous night. However, he felt their presence, like electricity in the air before a storm. Rusty stood up, the fur on his neck bristling but not in alarm. The dog seemed to be responding to a silent call. Walking to the edge of the clearing, he positioned himself like a sentinel, looking fixedly in the direction from which came the sounds of the invaders. "What are the Guardians saying, Emily?" asked John, approaching his daughter. "They say the forest will defend itself," she replied, her childish face acquiring a seriousness beyond her years. "But they need our help, your voice." Before John could question what this meant, heavy footsteps were heard approaching. Richard Barnes emerged from the shadows of the forest, followed by a team of at least 10 men. Some carried sophisticated scientific equipment, others excavation tools. 2 of them had a more robust build and hard expressions. Private security, John deduced. Next to Richard walked an older man with graying hair and thin-framed glasses, carrying a metallic briefcase. His analytical gaze passed over the guardian trees with barely disguised scientific fascination. "Impressive, isn't it, Dr. Mitchell?" said Richard, gesturing toward the trees that didn't exist the day before. "Exactly as I described. Accelerated growth, bioluminescent properties, unnatural intertwining patterns." The scientist adjusted his glasses, cautiously approaching one of the trees. "If what you told me is true, Richard, we're facing a discovery that will revolutionize botany, medicine, perhaps even physics." Richard smiled satisfied before noticing the presence of John and Emily in the center of the clearing. "Ah, the human guardians," he commented with sarcasm, although an almost imperceptible tremor in his voice betrayed his nervousness. "Good morning, Mr. Smith. I hope you rested well, because today will be a long day." John advanced, positioning himself between the newcomers and the center of the clearing where the crystal was buried. "You're on private property again, Barnes," he said, his voice firm despite the tension he felt. "And this time, you brought an army for your theft." Richard made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "Don't be dramatic. I brought scientists to document an extraordinary natural phenomenon, and some people to help with the heavy work. As for the property issue," he removed a folded document from the inside pocket of his jacket, "I have here an emergency court order that authorizes our team to conduct scientific research in this specific area, due to its exceptional potential for medical and energy advancements." John felt his blood boil at seeing Richard's triumphant smile. The businessman had played his cards during the night, using his influence and money to obtain, probably from a judge friend in the capital, an authorization that seemed legitimate. "You have no idea what you're messing with," warned John, feeling the vibration beneath his feet intensify with his growing anger. "The crystal cannot be removed without catastrophic consequences." Dr. Mitchell, who had heard the exchange, approached with interest. "Crystal? What kind of crystal are we talking about exactly?" Before John could respond, Richard intervened. "A unique mineral formation, possibly radioactive, with extraordinary bioluminescent and electromagnetic properties. It's buried exactly in the center of this circle of trees." The scientist seemed increasingly intrigued. "And these trees that grew overnight, that's biologically impossible." "See for yourself," challenged Richard, pointing to the fresh soil around the roots, the leaves still bright with newly acquired vitality. "Impossible or not, here they are." While the men conversed, Emily had approached John, holding his hand tightly. Her blind eyes were turned toward the sky, as if observing something that no one else could see. "The Guardians are furious, Dad," she signaled discreetly. "They say that if the crystal is disturbed again, they won't be able to control the Earth's response." John felt a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't an empty threat. He had witnessed only a fraction of the Guardians' power the night before. Richard, impatient with the scientific conversation, began giving instructions to his men. "Set up the perimeter. I want sensors around the entire clearing, soil analysis every meter. Dr. Mitchell, prepare your equipment to examine these trees. I want to know how they grew so fast and, more importantly, how we can replicate the process." 2 men with excavation equipment began approaching the circle of trees. It was then that Rusty, until then motionless at the edge of the clearing, emitted a deep growl that reverberated through the air like a final warning. At the same instant, the wind in the forest changed. From a gentle breeze, it became a circular current that seemed centered on the clearing. The leaves of the common trees around began to agitate violently, while the guardian trees remained perfectly still, their leaves now shining with an almost painful intensity. The ground began to tremble, not like the seismic shake of the night before, but in rhythmic waves, like the beats of a gigantic heart. The electronic equipment that Richard's men carried began to function erratically, some emitting alarm sounds, others shutting down completely. "What the hell is happening?" exclaimed one of the security guards, looking around with increasing alarm. Dr. Mitchell observed the phenomenon with scientific fascination, although his face also showed concern. Some kind of electromagnetic field, extraordinarily powerful. It's interfering with our equipment. Richard, however, didn't let himself be intimidated. "Proceed," he ordered, pushing his hesitant men forward. "I don't care what's causing this. I want that crystal." It was at that moment that Emily took a step forward, releasing John's hand. Her small body seemed to emanate a subtle aura, and when she spoke, her voice carried a different timbre, as if multiple voices were speaking through her. "This land does not belong to you, Richard Barnes, nor to anyone. We are its guardians, not its owners." The businessman looked at the girl with a mixture of astonishment and irritation. "Step aside, child. This is not a matter for you." Emily continued as if she hadn't heard. "The heart of the mountain is the anchor that maintains the balance. If it is removed, the imbalance will spread. It will begin here, but it will not end here." As she spoke, something extraordinary began to happen around her. The morning sunlight, upon touching the guardian trees, refracted in impossible patterns, creating translucent images in the air, visions of a possible future, the forest dying, rivers drying up, crops failing, the village of Pine Creek slowly transforming into a desolate land. Richard's men backed away, some dropping their equipment, their faces pale with fear. Even Dr. Mitchell seemed shaken, removing his glasses to clean them, as if doubting what his eyes were showing him. Richard, however, advanced, his determination fueled by decades of family obsession. "Light tricks, illusions," he shouted, although his voice betrayed uncertainty. "The crystal is just a rare mineral, not a magical talisman." He turned to his men, furious with their hesitation. "You're being paid for a job. Whoever refuses to continue won't see a penny." The threat had limited effect. Some men reluctantly resumed their positions, but others continued to retreat, murmuring about curses and forest spirits. John, who observed the scene with growing tension, felt a sudden mental clarity. The guardians had shown him the way, but the voice that needed to be heard was his. The voice of someone who had dedicated his life to that land, who knew it not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living being to be respected. Taking a step forward, he spoke, his voice carrying a natural authority that made all present turn their attention to him. "Richard Barnes, your grandfather came to these lands 60 years ago, seeking the same crystal. Do you know why he failed?" The businessman narrowed his eyes, surprised by the mention of his grandfather. "How do you know about that?" "Because my grandfather was here to stop him," John replied, "as I am here now. This is not a new battle, Barnes. It's the continuation of something much older, a cycle that you are destined to lose just as your grandfather lost." John's words seemed to resonate with a deeper truth than he himself understood. The images in the air intensified, now showing not just the future but also the past. An older man with features similar to Richard's, confronting another man whom John recognized from family photographs as his own grandfather. Richard paled upon seeing the image of his grandfather materialize in the air before him. This is impossible," he murmured, his arrogance finally shaken. "How are you doing this?" John advanced another step, the ground gently trembling beneath his feet, as if the earth itself encouraged him. "It's not us, Barnes. It's the land, the forest, the guardians who were here long before us, and will be long after. They are showing what happened before and what will happen again if you persist on this path." The images changed once more, now showing two divergent lines of future. In one, the desolation that would follow the removal of the crystal. In the other, the forest prospering, the village flourishing in harmony with nature, a vision of balance and renewal. "You have a choice to make," concluded John, his voice firm but without hostility. "Continue the cycle of destruction initiated by your grandfather or break it. Be the Barnes who saved Pine Creek, not the one who destroyed it." The silence that followed John's words was as dense as the morning mist that still hung between the oldest trees in the forest. The translucent images of possible futures continued suspended in the air, reflecting in the wide eyes of all present. Richard Barnes stood motionless, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, ambition, fear, doubt, and, surprisingly, a twinge of shame. Dr. Mitchell was the first to break the silence, approaching John with an expression of scientific fascination and newly discovered humility. "Mr. Smith, in 40 years of scientific career, I have never witnessed anything remotely similar to what we are seeing here," he said, removing his glasses to clean the fogged lenses. "This transcends our current understanding of biology, physics, and, well, practically everything we know." The scientist turned to Richard, his tone now laden with professional decision. "Richard, I cannot, in good conscience, participate in any attempt to remove the crystal. The evidence suggests we are dealing with a complex and delicately balanced ecological system. Disturbing it would be scientifically irresponsible and possibly disastrous for the region." Richard stared at the scientist with indignation. "You too, Mitchell? You let yourself be carried away by light tricks and rustic superstitions?" Dr. Mitchell sighed, pointing to the scientific instruments his assistants had set up at the edges of the clearing. "Look at the readings, Richard. Electromagnetic radiation in patterns never before recorded, soil analysis showing impossible mineral concentrations, and these trees." He reverently touched the trunk of one of the Guardian. "Trees, their cellular composition is completely anomalous. Whatever is happening here is real, measurable, and frankly revolutionary, but it's not something we can or should exploit commercially." The men hired by Richard exchanged nervous glances, increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. One of them, the oldest, stepped forward. "With all due respect, sir, I think we should reconsider. I've lived in this region for 50 years, and the stories about the forest guardians, well, I always thought they were just that, stories to scare children. But now—" He didn't complete the sentence, but his look at the images still visible in the air completed the thought. Richard ran his hands over his face, the gesture of a man divided between the obstinacy of a lifetime and the undeniable evidence before his eyes. His eyes fell on the image of his grandfather, still visible among the ethereal projections. The familiar face seemed to stare at him with an expression Richard had never seen in photographs, not determination or ambition, but regret. It was at that moment that Emily approached him, her small hand extended like an offer of peace. Richard looked at the blind girl with disconcertment. "What do you want, child?" "The Guardians want to show you something," she replied, her voice again merely childish without the supernatural echo from before. "Something you need to see." Hesitantly, Richard allowed Emily to take his hand. The moment their fingers touched, the images in the air changed drastically. Now they showed not the past or the future, but the present, seen through the eyes of the Guardians. The forest appeared as a resplendent web of interconnected energy, each tree a pulsating point of light, each animal a moving spark, each stream a brilliant current. And at the center of it all, buried beneath the Guardian trees, the heart of the mountain pulsed like a blue star, sending waves of vitality that sustained the entire network. Richard gasped, his legs wavering as if the weight of the vision were too much to bear. John quickly advanced, supporting the businessman before he fell. What is this?" murmured Richard, his eyes fixed on the radiant vision. "It's how they see," Emily replied, still holding his hand. "It's how I see, without needing eyes. It's the true nature of the world around us." The vision expanded, showing how the crystal's energy extended far beyond the forest, reaching the farms, the village houses, the fields where children played, the rivers from which fishermen drew their sustenance. It was a vivid demonstration of interconnection, a web of life that could not be broken without devastating consequences. And then, as a final revelation, the vision showed Richard himself, not as he saw himself, a ruthless businessman in pursuit of wealth and power, but as the Guardians saw him, a bright human soul with potential to create or destroy, to heal or hurt, to continue the cycle of greed initiated by his grandfather, or to break it once and for all. When the vision dissipated and Richard could again see the normal world around him, silent tears were streaming down his face. Emily gently released, his hand retreating to John's side. "My grandfather," began Richard, his voice choked. "He used to tell me stories about a treasure hidden in these mountains, something that would bring wealth and power to our family. He spent his entire fortune, his entire life searching, and died bitter for never having found it. I promised him on his deathbed that I would complete his search." He paused, looking at the increasingly faint image of his grandfather in the ethereal projections. "But he never told me what he was really looking for, what it really meant." John nodded understandingly. "Some treasures aren't meant to be possessed, Barnes. Some exist to be protected." Richard was silent for a long moment, his gaze traveling over the clearing, the guardian trees, the faces of the residents who were now beginning to arrive, brought by Ernest. Among them was Mrs. Anderson, slowly advancing with her carved cane, her wrinkled face serene as if she had waited all her life for this moment. "What happens now?" Richard finally asked, his voice carrying a new humility. It was Mrs. Anderson who answered, stopping beside John. "Now you choose, son of Augustus. Barnes, as your ancestor chose and as others will choose after you, it is the cycle that maintains the balance." Richard breathed deeply, straightening his shoulders as if making an irrevocable decision. "Dr. Mitchell," he called, turning to the scientist, "our research project has changed. We are no longer looking for a crystal to extract. We are studying an ecosystem to protect." The scientist smiled, nodding with approval. "A much more scientific decision, if I may say so, to study without interfering." Richard turned to John, extending his hand. "Mr. Smith, if you'll allow me, I'd like to propose a different partnership. No longer a resort that would transform these lands, but a research and conservation center that would preserve them, with the village as an active participant, not as cheap labor." John observed the extended hand for a moment, reading in Richard's eyes a sincerity that wasn't there before. Finally, he accepted the handshake, sealing a pact that was both a truce and a new beginning. The residents gathering around the clearing began to applaud, the sound spreading through the forest like a celebration. Emily smiled, her face turned toward the sky where the ethereal images finally dissipated, returning to the invisible world of the Guardians. 6 months later, Pine Creek was transformed, but not in the way Richard Barnes had originally planned. Where there were once simple houses deteriorating with time, now there were renovated structures, preserving the original architecture, but with structural improvements. The dirt road that connected the village to the nearest town had been repaved, but without widenings that would require cutting down ancient trees. In the center of the village, the old parish hall had been expanded to house the Pine Creek Ecological Research Institute, where scientists worked side by side with local residents, documenting the extraordinary biodiversity of the region. Dr. Mitchell directed the institute, his passion for scientific discovery now tempered by a deep respect for traditional knowledge. The village school, previously about to close due to lack of students, now overflowed with life. A special program had been created for children with disabilities, inspired by Emily, allowing them to learn while developing their unique perceptions of the world. John continued on his farm, but now part of his land served as a living classroom, where children and adults learned sustainable agricultural techniques. His connection with the forest guardians had deepened, allowing him to cultivate plants that many considered impossible in that climate. And in the heart of the forest, the clearing of the guardian trees remained protected, a sacred sanctuary visited only on special occasions. The trees had grown even more, their thick and contorted trunks forming patterns that seemed to tell stories to those who knew how to read. Their roots, deeply intertwined in the soil, kept the heart of the mountain safe in their living embrace. Entree. That specific afternoon, John walked along the trail leading to the clearing, Emily by his side and Rusty in front, as always. The girl had grown a few inches in the last few months, but her connection with the Guardians remained as strong as before. If anything, it had deepened, refined. When they reached the edge of the clearing, they found Richard Barnes already there, observing the Guardian trees with reverent respect. The businessman came regularly, bringing scientists who conducted non-invasive studies, documenting the extraordinary phenomenon of the trees without ever disturbing the delicate balance of the place. "Good afternoon, John, Emily," he greeted, a genuine smile replacing the arrogance of before. "I brought news from the capital." John nodded in acknowledgement, noticing the folder Richard was carrying. "Good news, I hope." "The best," replied the businessman, opening the folder to show official documents. "The area has been officially declared a protected ecological reserve. Not even future generations of politicians or businessmen will be able to alter it. It's done." John felt a weight he didn't even know he was carrying lift from his shoulders. The legal protection added to the supernatural protection of the Guardians, ensuring that the heart of the mountain would remain safe. Emily smiled, her face illuminated by a quiet joy. "The Guardians are happy," she said, her fingers tracing shapes in the air as if she could touch invisible beings. "They say the balance has been restored and the cycle broken." Richard looked at the girl with curiosity. "What cycle?" "The cycle of seeking and protecting," she explained. "For generations, your family sought what my father's family protected. It was a balance, but unstable, always tipping to one side or the other. Now, with your choice, the cycle has been broken. A new beginning has been created." The businessman nodded thoughtfully, his gaze wandering to the canopies of the guardian trees that filtered the sunlight in hypnotic patterns. "My grandfather died bitter for never having found his treasure," he reflected. "But I think in the end I found something much more valuable than he ever imagined." John smiled, observing how Rusty approached Richard comfortably, something unthinkable months ago. The dog, always sensitive to people's intentions, had accepted the businessman as part of the new balance. Emily sat in the center of the clearing, her fingers touching the soil with reverence. "I can feel the heart beating," she said, her face serene. "It's happy. The earth is happy." The leaves of the guardian trees trembled softly, although there was no wind. Their bluish luminescence intensified for a moment, like a silent confirmation. John sat beside his daughter, his hand over hers. Richard joined them after a moment of hesitation, forming a triangle around the point where the crystal rested, deeply buried, but always present. And so they remained in contemplative silence as the sun descended on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The surrounding forest breathed in unison, the animals retreated to their shelters, and the first star of the night appeared in the sky. The balance had been restored in Pine Creek, not through conflict or domination, but through mutual understanding and respect. The land which John had always loved, which Emily had always heard, which Richard had learned to value, would continue to flourish under the care of its guardians, both the supernatural ones and the humans who had chosen to protect it. And in the heart of the forest, the heart of the mountain pulsed, a constant reminder that the truest riches are not those extracted from the earth, but those preserved for the generations to come. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from.